You're listening to The Bounding Box, where we talk about web development, geo development, and everything in between.
All right, welcome to the Bounding Box. Today I got a great guest here. I have a fun guest. I have Dylan Schiemann. Dylan, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, what's your problem.
Hey Renee, good to hear from you. I'm Dylan. I'm one of the early JavaScript people. Worked on the JoJo toolkit back in the day. Currently, I'm working on Living Spec, which is a collaboration platform. I run Half Stack, which is a creative series of conferences about web technologies and the possibilities of the web. And I also maintain Slate.js, which is one of the leading rich text editor framework projects. It's open source as well. So yeah, it's those are my problems. Lots of things to do, you know.
You are juggling a lot, man. That is a lot of stuff you got going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I think it all sounds glamorous until last night my wife woke me up at like midnight, face first on my desk, saying, "Hey, you might want to get some real sleep tonight." I'm like, "Okay, all right,
But
I can
you've
do that."
you've always had a full plate for as long as I've known you, and I've known you quite a long time now at this point, and you've always been involved with a lot of different things going on, open source projects, your own work, and everything like that. I mean, I relate because I also have quite a few different things going on myself, along with everything else I do. But I mean, how do you manage all that?
So I think I'm always like that. I just have lots of energy, and it's hard for me to say no to things. But I remember my organic chemistry professor in undergrad, Dr. Schambach, who's unfortunately passed away. But he had this one day he comes in with this big jug, and he's like, "We need to fit as much in your life as possible. So what do you start with?" And he had like big balls and little balls and sand and water, right? He's like, "Look, if you put the big stuff in first, the important stuff, then that stuff gets done. Then you can add the little stuff and you can add more because then you can add sand in and then you can pour water in and you can live a full life. But if you start with the water or the sand, the less important stuff, you have no room to fit the big things into your life and make them matter." So it's all kind of about like prioritizing and making sure that you make the most important things happen first and then see what else you can sort of pile on or fit in. But I'm also like a super weirdly hyper productive person. I wake up at 3:45 because Starbucks opens at 4:30, and so that's enough time for me to be awake to drive the car to go get my first like quad shot of espresso for the day. I say first because it's not the last. And then like I use Living Spec to like track everything in my life and just kind of do that. And I have people I can rely on, a good team, and just people that I'm pretty good at like collaborating, not feeling like I have to do everything myself. So when someone wants to help, I try to encourage that rather than like tell them wrong, they're wrong in doing what they're doing. So it's just, but I have a lot of fun doing all these things, so it's hard to say no. It's hard to say no.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do use Living Spec for this podcast. It's really cool. It's interesting because I create my document. It's got this whole format. You create the document, then you just start writing, right? Like my typical workflow is I just create a bunch of bullet points and stuff like that, and then out of those I will create maybe a page where I go and I elaborate on my bullet point, and then from there I can start creating tasks. And tasks is where I really take advantage of it because that lets me go ahead and schedule like guests. I have a template snippet, I guess they're called Living Spec, right? Where I can add a
Yeah.
snippet that already adds all of like the format of how I'm going to do things, the things I need
Nice.
to do, right? So
That's
to
great.
remind
Yeah.
me, which is
Yeah.
really cool. That I get a lot of benefit out of that. And another thing I've used it for a lot too is I use it for my sessions for like conferences and stuff like that. So I typically will take my description of what the session is, says what I'm going to do, and then I go through and I start turning each of those lines into a different task and
Yeah.
outlining things and stuff easier way. And it works out pretty great. I enjoy it a lot. It's a great tool.
Yeah.
And it's got a nice editor, which is pretty
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. And it's built on Slate, which is what, so the open source part of it is still there. And it's funny, my son he's been programming for 2 years. He's 10 now. He just reminds me he's
Wow.
a decade old now, which makes me feel ancient. He's giving a conference talk next week.
I saw
And
that. He's doing it,
and he
right?
used yeah, and he's living spec to plan it out. He outlined his because he made like a pretty simple asteroids game in Python. It's a few hundred lines of code. Took him
Yeah.
like months to do and kind of tweak and perfect. And like he wanted to talk about the problems he had and things he did. And so he's like, "Well, this is what living spec's for, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, but normally you do it in advance, but you can always use it after the fact too, So it's kind of his style. But yeah, there's something powerful about just being able to get things out of your head and then organize them later. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And
Yeah.
then you can like mangle them into tasks or workflows or other big projects and kind of morph them around that doesn't assume you have the right answer up front. And I feel like that's kind of the beauty of open source and all the things I've done in my career is you don't really know necessarily where you're going. You know, you have an objective, you know, you have a rough goal, but you're not going to know. Like if you over plan, you miss out on the serendipity and the cool things you discover along the way, like from talking to users or talking to people who might use your product or service. And you like kind of pigeonhole yourself into a corner versus like giving yourself a direction and enough freedom to take advantage of the cool stuff along the way that you learn and build something even better.
That's awesome. And leading into that, like you're telling your son's going to speak next week, that's going to be at the Half Stack Phoenix. Right? I was looking at the schedule and I saw it's your son headlining and your second fiddle on the lineup for that one. But the Half Stack conferences are really fun because they aren't just like, let's learn how to build this tool or app, or let's learn how to use some software. They're really cool because they're really more creative in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I got burned out on conferences. I think I'd spoken at like 1,000 conferences by like 2014. And I'm like, what do I want from a conference? I'm like, I don't want to hear another vendor pitch. I don't want another talk where you tell me your technology is the only right solution.
Yeah.
I don't want a step-by-step training workshop. That's what a workshop or a blog post is for. I want to see what you could do with this thing. I want to see what side project you're creating. I want to see what fun things failed for you. I want to hear your story, like, so tell me your story, show me your cool demo. Like the technology is there, but it's almost secondary to like the output and the outcome.
Yeah, exactly.
The journey, right? And it's a reminder, like tech is here to serve us, it's not the end all. It's the foundation for us to build cool things with and do interesting stuff. Like one of my favorite talks ever. I mean, I've loved your talks with the visualizing, demographic data with audio overlaying a map. But like then another person sort of took that idea and they said, I'm going to make a skeleton playing banjo robot over web Bluetooth APIs, and because I can, and I'm going to show it off. Or another person made a Christmas sweatshirt. They call it a jumper in England, but the translation. And had a big LED panel, and it would listen for lyrics for Christmas carols and change the design on the front to like Santa Claus or Christmas tree or whatever, based on whatever song it was hearing, right? And all through web APIs, like, which is what was even cooler, And so it's just like this. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't do this in the browser or its APIs, but I'm going to anyway because I can.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's those kind of things like you go, oh, well, you're never going to ship that, but you never know. Like you really never know, right? It could be something, a brand new tool or something someone can use, or a new way of doing something, right?
Yep. Exactly. And it's those stories and those journeys and just treating people well. And like we have sponsors, but they're not there to sell you something.
Yeah.
They're there to like, okay, I'll give you some swag. If you ask, I'll tell you what we do. But I'm not here to like press you into working for us to buy our product. We're just here to like share what we've built. So I kind of pick people that I think have similar ideals, that their product speaks for itself, so they might as well just have fun with us. So like, our big sponsor for Phoenix besides us is NX, right? And they don't even give a talk. He just does the pub quiz with me. He co-MCs the pub quiz because he thinks that's really fun, and they give away good prizes and stuff. And like this year, and I know it's short notice, probably on after the podcast, or the podcast is probably on after the conference, but for every half stack this year that we sell out, we're going to give away a Vision Pro from Apple.
I saw that. That's
big prize. And the reason is we're tired of like people have been slow to come back to events. And yeah, we know COVID changed us and everything, but like we miss you. We want to actually hang out with you for a day.
Yeah.
We try to adjust the conference so it's not as intense, but we're also trying to like get people to want to be there. And so like, well, if you're there, you can win something really awesome. Maybe it's kind of an experiment for this year. But also, like in 2007, the iPhone changed my career. Apple invited me to speak at WWDC and said, "Hey, Dylan and Alex, give a talk about JavaScript." And we're like, "Cool." And we're at the Moscone Center in San Francisco. We're on our way to our talk. And there's this massive queue. And we're like, "Wow, there must be a really good talk going on right now." We get to the front of the queue, and it's for our talk. And we're like, "What?"
Oh, wow.
And like, well, there was no native SDK the first year. So they said, one more thing, if you want to learn how to build an app for the iPhone, go to Dylan Alex's talk on JavaScript. I'm like, well, that's funny. We've never played with an iPhone or seen one in person or used it, but JavaScript was the platform for the first year. She had like thousands of people there to learn about JavaScript, and it was this big game changer. But the iPhone itself really changed the way we build apps. It changed us into this touch experience, this on-the-go experience, this give me quick information, not the whole kitchen sink every time I open an app kind of thing. And I think the the Vision Pro has the chance. While VR and AR have been around for a while, phones had been around for a while, and then Apple came along and said, actually, this is the way to do the experience. And so we want more and more people thinking about this stuff. And right now, it's kind of a more expensive device and less approachable. So we want to put some in some people's hands to see if what they built next. So that's kind of the motivation.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how it goes. Right. I hope, and like first off, it's going to be like, people just showing like apps, windows in like in VR environments like that. But there'll be more coming out of it for sure down the road as people learn how to actually use it in more useful ways and provide better feedback on it and how people interact. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm just excited to have 2 4K screens on my eyes while I'm flying across the Atlantic and not having to deal with eye strain and bring an extra screen or whatever. I think that could be pretty cool. I've started recording some videos in 3D. I can't view them yet because the iPhone lets you record them. I just don't know what they look like until I watch them on the when it comes out next week. But yeah, I'm very excited about it, obviously. So the funny thing is they're releasing it the same day as Half-Stack, so I have to wait a day extra to pick it up.
Okay.
But I have on an order and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, the iPhone got me off of Flex and Flash because I just I had to at that point.
Yeah.
I really had to dive into JavaScript. I mean, before then, my only JavaScript usage was just to support things I couldn't do in Flex and Flash at the time. All right, but yeah, after that, it was just full blown JavaScript going forward. So, which I can't complain about.
Yeah, Flex did some really nice things. It was very early. Unfortunately, it was proprietary. And if they had ever thought about how do we export this to the web, they might still be in existence. Like the builder environment for Flash and Flex was really nice for that type of user that likes that sort of interface. They just never really figured out how to do that until the web took over and pushed them out of the way. I was a big proponent of use whatever you can. So like Dojo early on had components that felt a lot like Flex or Laszlo components at the time, but also, we had our SVG layer, which is how Esri ended up using Dojo that had Flash, Silverlight, Canvas, SVG, VML, like any environment we could export to at the time we did, because we wanted you to be able to render cool graphics in the browser. And that was kind of actually how I got started with JavaScript. I was a PhD chemist working on foam, and I wanted to be able to put my experiments on the web. And I realized the web could only draw pictures. It couldn't actually, it could do raster, but it couldn't draw pictures on the fly. And I'm like, that's a bit early, but this is really cool. I'm going to jump ship and work on this for a while.
Nice.
So, yeah.
And it was also because Dojo was battle tested. Now, you would be hard pressed to find anything years ago that could hold up in an enterprise environment like that could really stand up to browser usage and everything else people did.
Even today, every time we use React and Next and stuff, and when I update just a simple version of Next, I'm terrified of what's going to break.
Oh yeah,
because they are like, well, because we don't necessarily follow their rules and everything you're supposed to do, because they don't offer everything you might want, and other frameworks as well. And you're like, wow, this broke. It took me 3 days to upgrade. And I mean, with Dojo, it was always just change the version number, and pretty much it worked, unless we made a big mistake,
And you were talking about Slate.js and the rich text editor and stuff like that. That Dojo rich text editor, I mean, even today, it's got features there that you try to do on your own, and you're gonna struggle.
It had paste from Word in 2006.
Yeah,
and that's still difficult to do in most editors. It still leads to issues. Or there are projects that do it that are massive, and Dojo tried to do it a few kilobytes of JS. By
that's the thing too.
Clever hacks, yeah.
Size wise, I mean, it was just for what it did. It was amazing too. Dgrid.
Yeah.
I mean, even today, you trying to find any kind of table component or grid component that has tree structures in per cell type of thing. I mean. It's tough. I don't know if anyone
you have AG Grid, and they build a nice product, but it's not cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there's nothing open source like it, even today.
Which I'm sure someone will at some point. Someone's going to have a need for it and maybe have to build it, but I guess it's just not that required at the moment for most people, right? Things that they're doing and stuff.
It's kind of like people have either said, I'll just buy AG Grid, or I'll still use Dgrid because it still works somehow. You can use Dgrid on top of a React app. I see people do that somewhat regularly still.
Yeah.
It's a shame that Dgrid and Dojo really aren't maintained much anymore, but I needed to get on with this stuff, and I was kind of the last person who was really avidly Dojo must survive or else, and so I just felt like it was been almost in April, the initial email announcing Dojo is 20 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, last year we had a call with some of the early Dojo people because one of our friends passed away in late, it was in late 20. My days are running together. I think it was actually a year and a half ago now. We had a
Oh,
late
wow.
call
Okay.
one night, and we're like, wow, this product's been around long enough that people are, used it for their whole careers, and it's like, wow, this is insane, But when we set out to do it, we're like, well, probably need this for a couple years till the browsers catch up to us, and
Famous last words, right? I mean, like, oh yeah,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
need this very long. They'll add this at
Yeah,
some point.
yeah, I know. It took like 15 years to get a decent implementation of web components, which still miss a lot of the frameworky stuff you would need on top of them, right? And
Yeah.
so it's sometimes just painful to standardize things that are relatively easy to do in a one-off manner.
I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that I have to use tools like either Lit or Stencil to build like proper usable web components. I mean, you know, it gets me sometimes, but I don't mind. I'm a big Stencil guy. I do a lot of, that's my daily. At this point, that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing like daily now is Stencil, web components, stuff like that. And it's got the React syntax. They have TypeScript typings, which is
Right.
great.
Yeah.
Which I wish Lit had a way to do it with template
Yeah.
strings, something like that. But I'll take what I can
Well,
get.
the team at Ionic, started out as consultants and became framework people by, Ionic on top of Angular and then Stencil and a few other things they've done, right? And they're very focused on users, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Lit comes out of Google, which is fine, but Google typically works on frameworks that solve Google's needs. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I've always felt like, why would you trust a company that really builds a framework and then stops when they don't need it anymore as soon as they're done, versus something that's truly built by a company that actually, this is the thing they're supporting, this is the product, it's not just a giveaway, it is, they make their living off of supporting people who are successful with Ionic,
Yeah.
and that means they're going to do everything they can to provide the best possible experience. And that's just how it is. Like they're very focused on those problems, and I have a lot of respect for those guys.
The speaking of like tools like that, the Vision Pro stuff, is that still using Swift? Do you have to use Swift to build apps for that at this point?
Um, but it has a browser.
Oh, so it's got the browser and stuff built in. Okay.
Yeah, and you can also synchronize it with your computer, so it can basically become a screen for your MacBook Pro that runs an M1 or newer
Huh.
processor.
Okay.
And it itself has an M2 processor and an R1 processor for reality calculations. Because like if you're on a Zoom call, you're wearing it, you show up as an avatar with your facial expressions matching how you're actually looking, but you're not wearing the goggles. Instead,
Huh.
it is the goggles become the camera that represents your face, which is kind of trippy. But so it's supposed to be pretty interesting on how it works. But it's like it's got last year's MacBook Pro processor in it.
Wow.
Like
Okay.
wow, it's a seriously beefy machine. So it's pretty cool.
That's nuts. I gotta give that a shot. I mean,
Yeah.
I need to get a Mac first, I guess. Like, I have one for work, but it's not like an M1 or anything like that. Just get
Yeah,
work
unless
done.
you have an M1 or newer, I don't think you'll get as much value out of it, because I
Yeah.
do think this seamless experience of going between the computer screen and your goggles will be pretty huge. Um, but I mean I've had the M1 and now the M3 MacBook Pro. This one has 128 gigs of RAM. It is so fast. Right? I mean, it like so my build time from the last Intel Mac to the M1 Mac went from like 3 minutes for our app to like 45 seconds in this app, and now it's like 20 seconds to build our app.
Oh,
Just insane,
jeez.
because like thousands and thousands of npm packages getting compiled and TypeScript operations and all
And
sorts of
that's a lot
stuff,
for
right? And it's just,
productivity, right? Because you go
yeah,
from like, I mean, 20 seconds, 30 seconds means that no, I'm not going to get up from my machine to go do something else. But if I got to wait like a minute, 2 minutes, I'm probably going to get up for 5 minutes and go, do whatever else needs to get done because I can't do anything else. Right. So
yeah,
that really matters. It's a huge deal.
it does. So I'm a big believer in what you get the newest MacBook Pro you can with as much memory and drive space as you need or can afford, and let it last a few years, and just kind of it will pay for itself, in my opinion. So,
Nice. All right, Dylan. Well, I want to respectful of your time and everything here, but I do want to ask if you have any tips, tricks, any other words of advice for listeners today.
I'm actually going to start a podcast today about productivity hacks, because I am
Nice.
like a super optimizer. But our first episode that we're going to air is actually my co-founder is single screen one tab, super focused, right? And I'm like as many screens, as many windows, as many, like I'm on a 49-inch screen with a MacBook with all the screens, right? And so I have this like nice, just like contrast in styles. So the tip is find the environment that makes you most productive. It might be more, it might be less. It depends on how you focus and how you work. I need to see lots of things at once to remember everything I need to do. All that stuff is just kind of in his head, and then he just focuses on the one thing at hand. So we're not all the same, right? So find that environment that makes you as productive as possible. There's this cool device called the Neurosity Crown. It's like $1,200, but you wear it on your head, and it tracks your brainwave activity and determines if you're in a productive mood or not. And if you're not, it helps you become more productive by like telling you like what music to listen to or what to like go for a 5-minute walk, or gives you tips on like how to get your brain activity to the point where you can be as productive as possible and focus as
That
possible.
is cool.
Yeah. And they actually started out as more of like a thought computer, but then they realized their real value is perhaps in helping people be more productive versions of themselves. And their eventual goal is maybe they can cure depression with this thing, like for people without drugs, but just like a brainwave reader that then could adapt, and provide suggestions for you to like, find inner happiness and cool things like that. So
that is so cool.
yeah. So like, all right. So the Neurosity Crown, by the guys at Neurosity, and Neurosity. Finding the right zenful environment for you to work in, is always kind of key for me. I'm also a big fan of the Remarkable tablet. It's a tablet that only reads and writes. So it's good for drawing, it's good for typing, and it's good for reading. And it does digital ink, and the battery lasts a long time, and it does nothing else. So there's no games, no apps, nothing to install. The best you can do is install like a template, like kind of like you would for like. Now, I want those guys to pay attention to Living Spec and offer us nice APIs so we can synchronize them together. They haven't yet, but
that would be very cool if we could send all of my stuff directly there.
Yeah.
I'm still very much a pen and paper guy. I always keep these little notebooks on my desk and stuff like that, but I wouldn't mind having something like this.
This thing has a grainy feel, and it almost feels like writing on paper, which is pretty cool, but then it's digital. So it's as close to the paper experience as I've found. I've also gotten really into like digital notes in my watch. So I'll like speak into my watch at night and take a note. And then like, you're in bed and you have an idea and you're like, oh, hey, but what I want to do next is make a shortcut or an app that'll synchronize that to Living Specs. Like your late night thoughts suddenly end up in your spec in the morning, and then you just kind of, so anything you do to like remove the friction from your workflow, get ideas out of your head and into where they need to go, and just find yourself in that nice zenful place are big wins in my world.
That's awesome. Those are great. I'm going to take some of those.
Cool.
I love that. Yeah, you gotta let me know when that podcast comes out, when the episode comes out,
to
get started.
We're still learning, so maybe in a month, but we're kind of starting to record soon, and we'll see how it goes, and I'll keep you posted.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dylan. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Bounding Box today. Please subscribe for more content.